The first time I saw my husband kiss someone else, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't call the cops. I laughed, out loud, in the middle of Starbucks, with a caramel macchiato in my hand and a perfectly ironic smile on my face. My name is Vanessa Carter, I'm 41, and I've spent the better part of my life pretending to be shocked by the nonsense men get up to. But deep down I knew, if I ever caught someone red-handed, I'd turn the moment into a performance worthy of Broadway. And here it was. My husband, the man I married thinking he had at least a shred of decency, smooching the receptionist from his office like a high schooler discovering a stolen first kiss. I must admit my first thought wasn't, how could he? It was, oh, honey, you just signed your own eviction notice from my life. I hadn't noticed the signs at first. He was too good at hiding it, or so I thought. Little things, like how he suddenly cared a little too much about his grooming routine, or why he started leaving the house at weird hours with a phone that never seemed to rest. I chalked up to midlife crises and the existential dread of turning 45. But the truth has a way of nudging itself into your periphery, especially when it comes with a signature smell of cheap perfume and deception. That day I caught the scent. It was faint, cloying, foreign, and there he was, smiling like a man who'd just discovered a secret jackpot and hadn't realized he was still on my radar. After that Starbucks encounter, I became a detective in my own life. Not the dramatic kind with trench coats and magnifying glasses, though I considered it, it would have suited the mood perfectly, but the kind who watches, waits, and lets karma unfold like a well-edited documentary. I started noticing patterns, things that didn't quite add up. The late-night texts he'd hurriedly delete, the mysterious lunch meetings he always claimed were business, the little lipstick marks he somehow thought I wouldn't see. At first I played dumb. I smiled, nodded, and even complimented his new fresh cologne, while my mind was busy cataloging every misstep like a sarcastic narrator chronicling the downfall of an idiot. The thrill, though, wasn't in the discovery. It was in the anticipation. Watching him squirm, knowing I knew but pretending otherwise, it was delicious. I started piecing together her identity, not in a frantic, desperate way, but with the careful precision of someone playing chess. Every social media post, every mutual friend hint, every laugh he thought was private suddenly became a clue. And then I found her, Natalie, 34, the type of woman who thought charm could mask a complete lack of originality. She wore high heels and business casual-like armor, always with a lopsided grin, oblivious to the fact that her every move was under my microscope. I followed her, not in a creepy, cinematic stalker way, though I admit I imagined it like that sometimes, but more as a sardonic observer, noting how she waved at her oblivious husband in the mornings, how she ordered the same latte every day without variation, how she texted in a way that was equal parts needy and arrogant. And the more I watched, the more the plot thickened. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a hub of entitlement, completely convinced of her own narrative. And I had front row seats. The first confrontation was an art form. I didn't storm into her office like some vengeful banshee. I let it simmer, planned it with the precision of someone who knew timing was everything. One afternoon, when she least expected it, I appeared at the cafe where she had lunch every day, wearing a calm smile and a look that suggested I knew everything, which I did. She froze, mid-bite, her latte poised like a weapon she didn't know how to wield. "Funny," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I've been meaning to meet the woman who's been stealing my husband's charm. I hear it's a full-time job." Her face turned various shades of red, a visual symphony of panic and confusion. She stammered, tried to play it cool, but there was no recovering from the truth she didn't even know I had fully unearthed yet. As she faltered, I let her stew a little longer. I wanted to savor the panic, the fumbling explanations, the desperate attempts to reclaim some shred of dignity. And just when she thought she could deflect, I dropped the final piece, her own husband. I had spent weeks discreetly piecing together his life, his habits, his heartbreakingly oblivious nature. I orchestrated a chance meeting, or at least one that looked like chance, at a weekend brunch she frequented with friends. She hadn't a clue. And then there he was, standing behind her, raising an eyebrow, the perfect mix of confusion and disbelief mirrored across his face. The silence that fell was delicious, heavy with consequences. She turned to me, finally recognizing the hand she'd been dealt. Vanessa. But I didn't let her finish. I leaned back, folded my arms and smiled, letting the weight of the reveal sink in. I think introductions are overdue, I said lightly, gesturing to her husband. The chaos unfolded exactly as I imagined. Stuttering, muttered apologies, the awkward shuffling of feet, the realization that every lie she'd carefully built her week around was collapsing in real time. And all the while, my husband? He sat at home, oblivious to the theatrical unraveling of his little double life, the irony almost too perfect to handle. The aftermath was glorious. Natalie tried to play damage control, but nothing could undo the dominoes I had carefully lined up. Her husband, initially confused and embarrassed, eventually saw the truth as clear as the morning sun. And me? I walked away from it all with my dignity intact, my sense of justice satisfied, and a sharp appreciation for the power of observation, patience, and a well-placed, sarcastic comment. My husband never saw it coming. Not in the literal sense and certainly not in the karmic sense. He had underestimated me, a mistake he wouldn't repeat because, let's face it, he had no choice. Sitting back in my apartment that evening, glass of wine in hand, I reflected on the absurdity of it all. Infidelity, betrayal, secret rendezvous, and all the human foolishness I had witnessed could have crushed me, but instead, it became a kind of art form. There was power in knowing, in watching, in orchestrating justice without descending into madness. I had turned what could have been a tragedy into a performance, a private theater where I was both director and star. And if my husband ever wondered why he felt the chill in our marriage, I would just smile. Some lessons are best learned with a little black humor, a little patience, and the quiet satisfaction of watching the universe handle the heavy lifting. By the end of it all, I had redefined victory. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about clarity, control, and the undeniable thrill of showing up life's narrative as the protagonist, not a pawn. I learned that betrayal often reveals more about the betrayer than the betrayed. I learned that patience and observation can be more potent than any scream or confrontation. And most importantly, I learned that sometimes the sweetest justice isn't punishment. It's the art of revelation, the exquisite unveiling of truth at the perfect, devastating moment. And that day, in a crowded cafe with a latte in my hand, I felt like the queen of consequences, the maestro of karma, and the only person in the room truly in control. Some might call it revenge. I just call it Tuesday. Over the next few weeks, I turned the little game I had started into a full-blown project. I'm not talking about some obsessive, unhinged stalker behavior, though I admit I entertained the cinematic fantasy of sneaking around with a trench coat and dark glasses while sipping iced lattes. No, this was calculated, deliberate, and wickedly satisfying. Every move they made, every careless comment, every smug little smirk my husband thought he was getting away with, I catalogued. I became the invisible director of a darkly comic drama that unfolded right under their noses. My husband, blissfully unaware, walked around like a man in a bubble of self-importance, while I pieced together a story that would make even the most jaded soap opera writers jealous. I started small, collecting evidence the way a chef collects ingredients before a big feast. A snippet of text here, a photograph there, a whispered comment from a mutual acquaintance that felt like a clue dropped by fate. Every time I overheard my husband say something ridiculous to his mistress, my internal monologue went into overdrive. Oh yes, Tom. Tell her how committed you are to teamwork while she smiles like a cat who's about to be swallowed by karma. Brilliant choice. And the more I observed, the more I realized just how grotesquely predictable he was. Every lie, every attempt to hide the affair, was a stepping stone in my little tower of vengeance. The first major turning point came one afternoon when I accidentally ran into Natalie at a boutique downtown. She was wearing some painfully trendy outfit, the kind that screams, "I have no personality, but look at my bank account." And she was prattling on about how she had just scored a client meeting she didn't even deserve. She didn't notice me at first. Naturally, she was too busy being the center of her own imaginary spotlight. But then our eyes met. I smiled, just a small, innocuous smile that carried with it the weight of all the things she didn't yet know. And I swear, for a brief second, she registered the panic she would eventually feel when her entire constructed life started to unravel. I started orchestrating what I called the introduction, my pièce de résistance. It was a simple idea, but required precision. Natalie needed to meet the one person whose existence she had been blissfully ignoring, the husband she had been ignoring while stealing someone else's. I spent days subtly learning about him, finding out his routines, what made him anxious, how he would react if confronted with chaos. It was like assembling a puzzle where every piece had to fit perfectly to maximize the shock and drama. I almost laughed at the irony. My husband had no idea I had become the puppet master of this tragicomic theater. When the day arrived, I chose the setting with care, a weekend brunch at a quaint cafe that had the perfect balance of visibility and intimacy. Natalie arrived, radiating that overconfident smugness that comes from believing you're untouchable. She had no idea that her life was about to collide with reality in the most humiliating way possible. I lingered nearby, pretending to browse magazines while keeping an eye on the timing, savoring the delicious tension. And then he appeared, her husband, awkward and bewildered, holding a cup of coffee like a lifeline. She turned around, ready to flash that winning smile she used on my husband, only to see him staring back at her with a mix of incredulity and disbelief. The expression on her face was priceless: confusion, panic, and the dawning realization that someone else knew everything. I couldn't resist adding a little commentary, a subtle dagger of sarcasm to punctuate the moment. "Funny, isn't it?" I said, leaning casually against the counter. "How life has a way of introducing us to the people we least expect to see at brunch." Her jaw dropped, and for a second I saw that glorious moment where her world tilted, and all the little lies she had spun began to unravel like cheap thread. She stammered, trying to form words that would patch the impossible situation, but it was too late. The theater had been set, the audience was present, and I was the undisputed director. Meanwhile, my husband remained oblivious to the catastrophe brewing. He went about his day as if nothing had happened, thinking that his little secret rendezvous were safe. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Watching him parade around, clueless and overconfident, reminded me that some people truly do deserve to be blindsided by reality. And as I watched Natalie squirm, desperately trying to regain composure in front of her own husband, I felt the kind of satisfaction that no therapy session or self-help book could ever provide. It was pure, unadulterated poetic justice, served with a side of black humor. After the initial confrontation, I maintained a casual presence in their lives, just enough to keep the tension simmering. I sent subtle, sarcastic texts to my husband that hinted I knew more than I let on, and I made sure Natalie occasionally caught my gaze at social events, the silent reminder that the game was far from over. Every time she tried to assert control, I quietly observed, noting every misstep, every futile attempt at manipulation. It was like watching a badly written sitcom unfold in real time, and I was the only audience member fully aware of the punchlines. Then came the final act. I arranged an innocuous dinner party, nothing fancy, just a few mutual friends and the kind of ambiance that encouraged casual conversation. Natalie arrived, radiant with misplaced confidence, and my husband trailed behind, still entirely unaware of how deeply he had fallen into my orchestrated narrative. And then, at the precise moment, I subtly guided her husband into the room. The collision of worlds was instantaneous. Natalie froze, mid-laugh, as the man she had been neglecting, her real-life husband, stood in front of her, eyes wide with disbelief. The comedic timing was perfect, like a scene carefully choreographed for maximum effect. Her face turned every shade of red, orange, and purple as she struggled to process the chaos she had created for herself. The room was silent for a beat that felt like eternity. then erupted into a mixture of apologies, stammered explanations, and embarrassed shuffling. My husband, still clueless, lingered in the periphery, giving me the perfect opportunity to savor the irony. Natalie tried to talk, to justify, to plead, but it was too late. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, exposing everything she had tried so hard to hide. And as I observed the spectacle, a sense of calm satisfaction settled over me. This was not vengeance born of spite. It was art. The kind of art that leaves a permanent mark on the canvas of people's lives. Once the dust settled, I retreated to my apartment with a glass of wine, reflecting on the absurdity and beauty of it all. Betrayal had a way of revealing character, and I had learned a lot about mine. Patience, observation, strategic planning, and the undeniable power of turning chaos into performance. My husband had underestimated me, Natalie had overestimated herself, and I had emerged once again fully in control. And as I sipped my wine, the realization settled in. Sometimes the sweetest justice isn't punishment. It's revelation, delivered with impeccable timing, a touch of black humor, and an audience that will never forget the spectacle. That day, I had not only uncovered the truth, but I had orchestrated its most dramatic, satisfying unveiling, proving that in the theater of life, some women really do deserve the starring role. The days after the dinner party were interesting, to put it mildly. I had expected Natalie to retreat into shame and invisibility, but she was nothing if not persistent in her delusions of self-importance. She tried to act normal at work, smiling through every interaction, pretending nothing had happened, but the tremor in her voice and the slight twitch in her eyes betrayed her every thought. Meanwhile, my husband remained blissfully ignorant, or at least he acted that way, wandering around the house as if nothing had ever happened. I half expected him to ask me how my day was while holding a bouquet of excuses, but instead, he seemed content in his little bubble of oblivion. Watching him was almost a hobby at this point, the kind of passive entertainment that comes with a hint of dark humor and the satisfaction of knowing the chessboard was mine to command. I continued my careful observations, documenting every encounter, every misstep, every half-hearted attempt Natalie made to repair the damage. It was astonishing how oblivious she was to the reality around her. She strutted through life thinking she was untouchable, yet every time she made a move, it was like watching a toddler try to navigate a minefield. I found myself chuckling quietly in my apartment, glass of wine in hand, as I pieced together the next stage of my plan. The thrill of anticipation, the meticulous orchestration of consequences, it all felt like I was conducting a symphony, each note perfectly timed, every crescendo hitting just as it should. One afternoon, I decided it was time to escalate the game. I knew that Natalie's husband had been silently observing, slowly putting together the pieces of the puzzle I had so carefully laid out. He hadn't spoken to her about anything yet, unsure if he was witnessing reality or some elaborate hallucination. I orchestrated a chance accidental meeting at the local farmer's market, a place where Natalie liked to flaunt her curated lifestyle, picking up artisanal cheeses and organic produce like they were trophies of her superiority. I made sure she saw me, giving her that subtle, knowing smile that said, "I see everything, and your life is about to get very uncomfortable." Then I guided her husband into the scene, pretending to bump into him as if it were coincidental. The moment their eyes met, the world shifted. Natalie froze mid-step, her overpriced tote bag clutched to her chest, as her husband's gaze locked onto her with a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. She opened her mouth, probably to offer some preemptive excuse, but nothing came out. The silence between them was deafening, the kind of quiet that stretches out and highlights every guilty thought and poorly made decision. I stood back, savoring the drama, my heart pounding with the satisfaction that only comes from seeing carefully executed justice unfold in real time. After the initial shock, there was chaos. Natalie tried to speak, to explain, to manipulate the narrative, but it was futile. Every word she uttered was undercut by her own previous actions and the silent judgment radiating from her husband. He stood there, processing, recalibrating, realizing that everything he had believed about his marriage and his wife's fidelity was suddenly shattered. And my husband? Still oblivious, he wandered past the scene entirely, a living testament to the dangers of underestimating the people around you. I almost laughed aloud, but I restrained myself, letting the comedy of errors speak for itself. Once the dust settled, I orchestrated a few more subtle encounters, each designed to remind both of them that I was still in control. At work events, I made sure Natalie caught glimpses of me across the room, a silent observer to her slowly unraveling confidence. I sent my husband pointedly sarcastic texts, mild enough to avoid confrontation but sharp enough to remind him that I had all the leverage. The beauty of the situation was that I didn't have to raise my voice, issue threats, or create drama. The universe, combined with my careful planning, did all the heavy lifting. As the weeks went on, Natalie retreated, her bravado crumbling in small increments. The more she tried to assert herself, the more transparent her manipulations became. And I watched it all unfold with a mix of bemusement and grim satisfaction. Each encounter, each nervous glance, each faltering excuse was a victory. My husband remained blissfully ignorant, a pawn in the broader game I had designed, and the irony was almost too delicious to bear. One evening, I decided to close the final chapter in style. I invited a few friends over for dinner, making it seem casual, nothing more than a friendly gathering. But the real guest of honor was tension itself, carefully cultivated and palpable. Natalie showed up, predictably overconfident, ready to perform her version of "everything is fine." My husband followed, dragging along his oblivious air, blissfully unaware of the narrative threads about to collide. And then I subtly guided Natalie's husband into the dining area, the pièce de résistance of my ongoing symphony. The collision of realities was instantaneous and dramatic. Natalie froze mid-sentence, her confidence evaporating as she recognized him. The look on her face was a mixture of horror, disbelief, and the dawning realization that her life, meticulously curated and precariously balanced, was collapsing in real time. I couldn't resist commenting lightly, with that signature sarcasm that had become my armor and weapon. "Isn't it fascinating?" I said, swirling my glass of wine. "How life enjoys delivering its little surprises when we least expect them." Her stammering attempts to explain themselves only amplified the dramatic effect. The room crackled with tension, every glance and gesture weighted with consequences. And I stood there, serene, observing the chaos I had orchestrated, savoring the exquisite satisfaction of a plan executed with precision. In the aftermath, both Natalie's and my husband learned lessons they weren't expecting. Natalie's illusions of control crumbled, her attempts to salvage dignity failing spectacularly. Her husband, initially bewildered, slowly absorbed the truth, realizing the depth of deception and manipulation that had been going on under his nose. And my husband? Well, he remained a study in oblivion, entirely unaware of the chaos he had sparked, and the fact that he had been thoroughly outmaneuvered at every turn. As for me, I walked away from it all unscathed, my sense of justice satisfied and my self-respect intact. I realized that life, with all its betrayals, lies, and absurdities, is best navigated with patience, observation, and a touch of dark humor. Revenge, I discovered, doesn't always require anger or confrontation. It can be a quiet, elegant affair, orchestrated with precision and executed with timing so perfect it leaves everyone else gasping. Sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. Patience is a weapon, observation is power, and the true satisfaction comes not from punishing others, but from revealing the truth with impeccable timing and style. I had turned what could have been a crushing betrayal into a performance, a private theater where I was both director and star. I had taken a man who thought he was clever and a woman who thought she was untouchable and shown them the full measure of their folly. And through it all, I remained poised, self-assured, and in control, laughing quietly at the chaos while sipping my wine. Betrayal had been transformed from tragedy into art, deception into theater, and humiliation into a spectacle of poetic justice. Some might call it revenge. I call it Tuesday. After the dinner party, life settled into a peculiar rhythm, one that was both absurd and intoxicating. I had discovered a new form of entertainment, passive observation paired with subtle manipulation. I didn't have to confront anyone directly to see the repercussions of my careful orchestration. Every glance, every hesitation, every nervous twitch became a piece of art, a note in the symphony of my revenge. Natalie tried to maintain her composure, striding into rooms with the same overconfident air as always, but the cracks were obvious to anyone with eyes, especially me. I watched her missteps with a mixture of amusement and schadenfreude, knowing that every small failure was a brick in the wall of karma I had built for her. My husband, of course, remained completely oblivious. He roamed through our home like a man in a bubble, patting himself on the back for not getting caught, completely unaware that the entire narrative was being rewritten behind his back. Every time he boasted or bragged about some new accomplishment, I filed it away mentally, savoring the irony of his self-congratulations as the man who had unknowingly placed himself in the middle of a meticulously arranged drama. The sheer predictability of his behavior was almost laughable, and I found myself chuckling to myself more often than not. Watching him was like attending a tragicomic performance where the actor doesn't know the script has changed. I decided it was time to escalate the situation, just a notch higher. The goal was no longer simply to expose Natalie, but to make her confront the reality of her actions in the most direct and unavoidable way possible. I began orchestrating chance encounters designed to maximize her embarrassment and guilt. One Saturday morning, I intentionally ran into her at the farmer's market. She was scanning the vegetable stand like a drill sergeant reviewing recruits, completely focused on her own agenda and completely unaware of the storm approaching. I let her notice me with a faint, knowing smile, the kind that suggested I knew more than anyone could possibly imagine. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her eyes widened, she froze mid-step, and she instinctively clutched her tote bag tighter. The subtlety of the moment was perfect. She knew something was coming but couldn't yet place it. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, I guided her husband into the scene. Of course, it looked like total coincidence, a bump in the aisle, a murmured apology, but the timing was flawless. Their eyes met, and the collision of awareness was immediate. Natalie's confident demeanor dissolved instantly. She opened her mouth, likely to produce some rehearsed excuse or attempt to regain control, but nothing came out. The silence was delicious, stretching across the market like an unspoken verdict. I observed the scene with satisfaction, knowing that this meeting was the moment when the consequences of her choices fully materialized. From that moment on, Natalie's behavior shifted subtly but irreversibly. Every attempt she made to regain composure or assert control was undercut by the knowledge that I, and now her husband, were both fully aware of the full scope of her duplicity. It was fascinating to watch her struggle to navigate the space between reality and illusion. Even small interactions became exercises in controlled panic for her, and I reveled in the dramatic irony that she remained completely unaware of the broader narrative in which she had become a character. My husband, still blissfully naive, wandered through the periphery like a wandering ghost, entirely unlinked from the chaos unfolding just beyond his awareness. Eventually, I realized it was time for the final, definitive act, the pièce de résistance. I arranged another gathering, this time a casual weekend brunch at a local cafe that offered both visibility and intimacy. Natalie arrived, radiant and oblivious, believing she could mask her anxiety with her usual facade of charm and confidence. My husband followed, content in his ignorance, completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf the room. And then, at the precise moment, I subtly directed Natalie's husband into the area. The collision of realities was instantaneous. Her confident posture crumbled, her jaw dropped, and the color drained from her face as she realized the man she had been neglecting, her own spouse, was now standing right in front of her, fully aware of everything. I couldn't resist a small, ironic comment, delivered with the calm authority I had cultivated over the weeks. "Isn't it funny? I said, swirling my coffee in my hand. How life has a way of introducing people to the truths they'd rather ignore? Her floundering, desperate attempts to explain themselves were almost artistic in their futility. Every word, every gesture, every faltering attempt to salvage dignity only amplified the comedic and dramatic tension. I leaned back, silently applauding the perfect execution of my plan, and let the scene unfold with minimal intervention, savoring every detail like a connoisseur savoring a complex, layered meal. After the brunch, I maintained my calculated distance, letting the reverberations of the encounter work their magic. Natalie, now acutely aware of her position, became increasingly cautious and self-conscious, while her husband slowly processed the magnitude of the deception he had been living with. My own husband, of course, remained utterly oblivious, giving me a front-row seat to the irony of his situation. Every glance, every pause, every flicker of recognition or guilt became a small victory, reinforcing the lesson that control, patience, and timing are infinitely more powerful than brute force or confrontation. One quiet evening, I reflected on everything over a glass of wine. Betrayal had initially struck like a physical blow, but through observation, patience, and strategic action, I had transformed it into a performance, a theater where I held the reins and orchestrated every scene. I realized that the sweetest victories don't always come from loud declarations or explosive confrontations. They come from careful planning, impeccable timing, and the ability to let others' actions and missteps reveal their own truths. My husband had underestimated me, Natalie had overestimated herself, and I had emerged once again fully in control. The satisfaction was quiet but profound, the kind of deep, simmering triumph that cannot be replicated through mere revenge. It is an art form. Through this experience, I learned a lot about human nature, relationships, and the subtle but powerful dynamics of betrayal and justice. I learned that observation and patience can be more potent than confrontation. I learned that timing, subtlety, and a bit of dark humor can transform a painful situation into a triumphant one. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best revenge is not punishment, but revelation. The careful, deliberate, perfectly timed exposure of truth that leaves everyone else to deal with the consequences. Sitting in my apartment, reflecting on the past few weeks, I realized that I had not only navigated the treacherous waters of infidelity and deception, but had also redefined victory on my own terms. The satisfaction was complete, and the lesson was indelibly learned. In the theater of life, some women are meant to be the directors, the stars, and the arbiters of poetic justice, and I had proven, with perfect execution and darkly comedic flair, that I was all three. And so, with my glass of wine in hand and a knowing smile on my face, I allowed myself to enjoy the quiet triumph of a story perfectly orchestrated, a drama carefully conducted, and a lesson indelibly delivered. Some might call it revenge. I call it the art of living with wit, patience, and absolute control. The kind of control that ensures betrayal is not just confronted, but transformed into a masterpiece of timing, humor, and unassailable satisfaction. That day, I wasn't just a participant in life's chaos. I was the author, the director, and the critic, and the story unfolded exactly as it should, with every misstep, every revelation, and every moment of poetic justice perfectly aligned. Tuesday, I realized, could be just as satisfying as any dramatic finale, if you knew how to play the game. And I, Vanessa Carter, knew exactly how. Понял. Давай я перепишу финальные 5-10% истории полностью на английском, максимально адаптируя под англоязычную аудиторию США с тем же тоном, сарказмом и черным юмором. After the brunch, life settled into a strange, almost absurd routine. I had discovered a new form of entertainment. Watching, observing, and letting subtle manipulations unfold. I didn't have to confront anyone directly. The consequences played themselves out like a perfectly rehearsed drama. Every glance, every twitch, every nervous pause became part of the performance. A small masterpiece in my carefully orchestrated play. Natalie tried to maintain her composure, strutting into rooms with that same overconfident air, but the cracks were impossible to hide. My husband, blissfully oblivious, wandered around as if the universe itself was conspiring to protect him from reality. Watching him was almost comedic, like observing a character in a poorly written sitcom who doesn't realize he's the punchline. I knew it was time for the final act, the pièce de résistance. Another casual brunch, this time at a quaint cafe, became the stage for the grand finale. Natalie arrived, radiant and utterly convinced she could hide everything behind her polished exterior. My husband trailed behind, completely ignorant of the disaster about to unfold. And then, just at the perfect moment, I subtly guided her husband into the room. The collision of realities was instantaneous. Natalie froze mid-step, her face draining of color as the man she had been neglecting, her real husband, stood in front of her, fully aware of her lies. The look on her face was priceless: disbelief, panic, and the realization that the carefully constructed world she had built for herself was collapsing in real time. I couldn't resist a little sarcastic commentary, delivered with perfect timing. "Isn't it funny," I said, swirling my coffee, "how life enjoys introducing us to truths we've been ignoring?" She stammered, trying to explain herself, to patch her crumbling facade, but every word only amplified the chaos. The tension in the room was palpable, almost cinematic, and I watched it unfold like a director enjoying the final cut of her masterpiece. My husband, still clueless, lingered at the edge, a perfect reminder of how dangerously naive he had been. Over the following days, Natalie's confidence eroded entirely. Every attempt to act normal, to assert herself, was painfully transparent. Her husband, slowly piecing together the full extent of her deception, could no longer ignore the reality that had been unfolding right in front of him. My own husband continued to float through life, blissfully unaware that he had been outplayed, completely oblivious to the meticulous orchestration around him. Every nervous glance, every awkward pause, every faltering apology became my private celebration of patience, strategy, and control. One quiet evening, with a glass of wine in hand, I reflected on everything. Betrayal had initially felt like a devastating blow, but I had turned it into a performance, a theater in which I held every role: director, lead actor, and audience. I realized that the most satisfying victories don't come from shouting or confrontation. They come from observation, strategy, and impeccable timing. Revenge is an art form, not chaos. With patience, humor, and a little finesse, I had transformed deception into revelation, humiliation into poetic justice, and betrayal into a triumphant narrative. I had turned what could have been a crushing betrayal into a testament to my own strength. I learned that patience, observation, and subtle manipulation could achieve more than anger or confrontation ever could. I had proven, to myself and everyone around, that control and intelligence are far more powerful than bluster. And now, with a quiet smile and a glass of wine, I could finally enjoy the culmination of weeks of careful planning. I wasn't just surviving betrayal, I was thriving in it, orchestrating it, and proving that the true victor is always the one who stays calm, observes, and strikes with precision. That evening, I realized something important. I wasn't merely a participant in life's drama. I was the director, the lead actor, and the critic. I had shown those who underestimated me that some women aren't to be trifled with. Some women watch, wait, and deliver justice with perfect timing and a hint of dark humor. Natalie had learned her lesson, her husband had seen the truth, and my own husband, well, he remained blissfully unaware, a living testament to what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person. And me? I, Vanessa Carter, emerged stronger, smarter, and victorious, with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing the story had unfolded exactly as I intended. And the lesson had been perfectly delivered. Revenge, I discovered, isn't about rage or chaos. It's about art, timing, and control. And in the theater of life, some women are born to direct, star in, and critique the show. That day I played all three roles flawlessly.